I'm Colonel Maya Rios, 42, and I've spent 20 years in uniforms most people never see, in rooms where the air itself feels classified. I command Echo Viper, a joint tactical unit built for rapid response, intelligence fusion, asset recovery, and the kind of operations that never make it into briefings with PowerPoint. It sounds impressive until you hold it up to my father, who's always treated me like the quiet kid who kept the papers straight. Last summer, I flew home for one of his backyard barbecues. I hadn't been back in months. Work had eaten my calendar and most of my sleep, and I needed a breath that didn't taste like recycled air. I walked through the gate in travel clothes from D.C., expecting a beer, forced smiles, a polite exit. Instead, I got a joke dressed as Pride. He stood by the grill with a semicircle of his old Air Force buddies, laughter rolling easy. When he saw me, he raised his voice. "There she is, my daughter. Keeps the folders and flight logs straight. Best support staff you'll ever meet." They laughed the way men laugh when they think they're being generous. I smiled like it didn't hit, but it did. I'd buried soldiers. I'd ordered extractions under fire. I'd watched dots on a screen go still and known exactly what that meant. In one sentence, he filed me away. I shook hands, let it hang between us like smoke, and felt something inside me sink. I grew up in a home where everything had a correct angle. My father, a retired Air Force engineer, loved blueprints and protocol objects that obeyed. He didn't know what to do with a daughter who asked questions that didn't fit inside a schematic. When I took apart the lawnmower at 10 and brought it back to life, he told the neighbor I'd held the flashlight. He didn't mean it as a slight, that was the ache of it. It was always almost nearly good for a resume, maybe an administrative track. When I said I wanted the military, he laughed. Said I'd hate the boots and the yelling. Suggested ROTC admin if I had to. The Air Force always needs schedulers. I pushed anyway, quietly, relentlessly. I studied, ran before dawn, let the numbers do the talking. He stood in the back at my college graduation, clapping with one hand in his pocket. When I showed him my commission, he nodded the way a man nods at an oil change. My first post was as a junior signals officer aboard a carrier. I learned the timing of battle and the stubborn physics of bandwidth. A year in, I earned a commendation for pulling a joint exercise back from the brink. I called home. He was glad I was keeping busy. Asked if I'd fix my car. I stared at the ocean and wondered how he could make big things feel small. At 28, I coordinated real-time signals intelligence with allied partners in Europe. I missed weddings, funerals, and most of my 20s. He missed my promotion to captain, said the flight was expensive and the hotel a hassle. At 32, I briefed teams before raids, built digital trails that saved lives, and slept under fluorescent lights. I sent him photos. He texted, "Looks intense. Stay safe." I made major during a classified deployment in Africa. We had a nighttime extraction under fire. We lost 2. I didn't sleep for 3 days. When I finally called, he told me the neighbor's kid had made airborne. "Now that's a tough gig," he said. Eventually, I stopped telling him anything. The plaques and certificates lived in a box under my bed. When I was tapped for Echo Viper at 36, I didn't mention it. He believed I'd landed in logistics. I let him. Echo Viper wasn't a job you applied for. They watched. They waited. And when you were ready, a knock came that felt like gravity. The intake brief ran 6 hours, half of it names and numbers I wasn't allowed to write down. We worked in the gray, tracking movements before strikes, mapping ambushes, following money to bombs. I led analysts, field operatives, and combat liaisons, cycling through blackout rotations. Missions hit like lightning. Once we diverted a convoy 3 minutes before it rolled onto a pressure plate. Another time I stayed on comms, talking a field lead out of a warehouse under drone fire. Sometimes I still hear his breath between my words. There were no headlines, no ribbons, just encrypted thank yous, and people going home. My father asked what I actually did. I said I coordinated joint ops. He chuckled. "Bet you're great with maps. Organized girls keep the machine running." I changed the subject to his medication. So when I walked into his backyard in that summer heat and saw the old pilots lined up with beers, I already knew the script. He slapped my back and beamed. "This is my daughter, best logistics officer in the game." The men nodded politely. One asked if I'd ever deployed. I said yes. "Stateside or overseas?" "Mostly overseas," I answered. My father cut in. "She's more brains than boots, not really a field type. Charts and timing. Her COs swear by her." My face didn't move. I'd been in unsecured zones at 2 a.m. with comms hissing like snakes. I'd ridden out in the back of an armored vehicle, knees against a bleeding corporal. But there I was, clipboard girl. I drifted to the grill to breathe, knuckles tight. Then one of the men peeled away from the group. Older, lean, a quiet authority you don't have to announce. Colonel James Lell. I knew the name from after-action reports. His eyes caught on my watch, matte black, unremarkable to most. He looked at it for a beat, straightened almost imperceptibly, and his voice shifted. "You're Echo Viper," he said, not a question. "EV-37 issue." He looked at me fully. "You're not support, you're command." The conversation behind us died. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but held his gaze. "Yes, Colonel. I lead the unit." His friendly smile vanished into something like respect. He set his beer down, posture sharpening a degree. "Colonel," he said quietly, as if he'd just realized he'd been standing too close to a live wire. He turned to my father. "How long have you known?" My father cleared his throat and said nothing. He stood there trying to square the daughter who filed papers in his head with the one standing in front of him. I didn't have to say a word. The silence did the work. Years of being unseen collapsed into that pause, and for once I was undeniable, not because I demanded it, but because someone fluent in the language of what I do recognized me. After the guests left and the dishwasher hummed, the house fell into that late-night quiet where everything sounds truer. My mother went upstairs. I leaned against the kitchen counter like I had after teenage curfews. He sat at the table, fingers laced, smaller than I'd ever seen him. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You never asked," I said, steady. The words landed between us like a wall neither of us knew how to climb. He nodded, slow, like he'd taken a hit and was trying to stay upright. He said he thought I'd tell him if it mattered. I didn't know how to explain all the times I had and he hadn't heard. He said he was proud. It sounded like a new language in his mouth. I wanted to believe it. Part of me did. The rest of me felt exhausted years of pushing against a door that never opened. He asked if it was too late to fix it. I didn't have an answer. We sat in the quiet, two people finally noticing how far apart we'd drifted. A week later, a plain envelope arrived with my name in his handwriting. No return address. Inside was his pilot ring, the one that used to click against coffee mugs, and a short note. "I got it wrong. You didn't get there because they let you in. You got there because you belonged." That was it. No flourish, no apology stamped in bold, but it was an acknowledgement he'd never made before. I held the ring and felt something uncoil. I didn't wear it. I kept it on my desk. A small, stubborn correction to our story. A year later, I sat before a congressional committee, answering questions about national intelligence with the calm that comes from knowing your subject better than anyone in the room. Cameras, lights, theater. I told the truth the way I always had. Only this time, people listened. That night, someone sent me an article, 10 Women Reshaping Military Command. My name was third. I read it twice, not for the headline, but for the line beneath. A quiet, effective commander redefining leadership from the inside out. When I visited my father's grave a week after his funeral, the grass was still settling. The stone was simple. I stood for a long time before speaking. Then I told him what he'd missed, that I'd trained 2 of the youngest unit leads now running ops overseas, that one of my former analysts had taken over cybersecurity for Western Command, that the people I'd mentored carried not just skills, but a steadiness I wished he'd seen in me sooner. I set the ring on the stone for a minute, then slid it back into my pocket. I wasn't done with it. Maybe I never would be. Legacy isn't just what you leave, it's who you build. For years, when people asked what I did, I hedged habits, carved by someone else's doubt. Now when they ask, I don't hesitate. I tell them I lead, and that isn't a correction, it's the truth.